This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for March 19th through the 25th. On this week's show, we find out why March 19th is a depressing day in music history. We talk about the first major rock concert ever held that also became maybe the shortest rock concert ever held. And we say happy birthday to two rock and roll legends who were born on March 25th, exactly 5 years apart. This show goes more in depth about some of the events that we put on our daily podcast, the Music History Today podcast, which drops every single day, including weekends, wherever you get your podcast from. Now, on to this week's episode. When you go to a sports arena, any sports arena, inevitably, Ozzy Osbourne's song Crazy Train comes on to pump up the crowd. You hear Ozzy's "All Aboard!" and then the bass and drums kick in under Ozzy's maniacal laugh, and then you hear the guitar. Oh, that guitar. That guitar drives that song, especially the guitar solo, which is one of the greatest guitar solos in the history of metal rock. On March 19th, 1982, the guitarist who delivered that blistering solo was silenced forever. Randy Rhoads was born on December 6, 1956. He came from a musical family, studying music theory under his mother Dolores. In 1971, Randy and his brother went to see an Alice Cooper concert, and Randy was hooked. Randy got so good at playing guitar that at the age of 16, he was also teaching guitar at his mother's music school. He was also forming a band with his friend Kelly Garney. They recruited lead singer Kevin DuBrow and drummer Drew Forsythe and called themselves Little Women, but then they changed their name to Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot was creating a following in Southern California, but for some reason could not get a record deal in America. The best the band could do at the time was to release 2 albums over in Japan. Around this time, Ozzy Osbourne came calling. Ozzy was trying to form a new band after his parting with Black Sabbath and wondered if Randy would join him. Since Randy was upset that Quiet Riot wasn't going anywhere in America, Randy quit Quiet Riot and joined Ozzy's new band. It wasn't quite that easy, though. Ozzy's management wanted to keep the band all British, but once they heard Randy, they relented and gave him the gig. The new band was called the Blizzard of Oz. Oh, for the record, Quiet Riot would eventually get that elusive recording contract in America and would have a huge hit album called Metal Health, which had a couple of huge hits, a remake of Slade's Come On Feel the Noise, and also Bang Your Head, Metal Health. Lead singer Kevin DuBrow, by the way, would later be fired by the band, but the band would reform in 2002, only to have DuBrow pass away from a cocaine overdose in 2007. Back to Randy, though. Randy did not fit the stereotypical rock star image, aside from maybe some long hair. He rarely drank, never did drugs, although he was a big-time cigarette smoker. He was also heavily influenced by classical music, thanks to his music school upbringing. In his new band, he was allowed to showcase his influences, becoming one of the leaders of what would soon become known as neoclassical metal. In fact, Rhoads, for a time, thought about quitting Ozzy's band and going to UCLA to get his bachelor's degree in classical music. Fate, however, had other plans. On March 19th, 1982, the band was on their tour bus driving to a festival in Orlando, Florida from Knoxville, Tennessee. They stopped next to an airstrip in Leesburg, Florida to fix a problem on the bus. While everybody was waiting for the bus to get fixed, tour bus driver Andrew Aycock decided that he wanted to fly one of the small private planes at the airport, as Aycock was also a private plane pilot. Aycock took a Beechcraft F-35 airplane for a ride, apparently without the owner's permission. Most of the band was still asleep on the bus, but keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan were awake, so they went for a quick ride with Aycock. That trip ended without incident. Then he took Randy, who was awake by then, and the band's makeup artist, Rachel Youngblood. Aycock decided to start goofing off and tried buzzing the tour bus. He made 2 passes at the bus. Both went okay. Then he tried pass number 3, and on the 3rd pass, things went horribly wrong. One of the wings on the plane clipped the bus, breaking the wing. At this point, both Randy and Rachel's heads crashed through the windshield. If they were still alive at that point, they weren't, unfortunately, for much longer. The plane went out of control, clipped a tree, crashed into a garage, and burst into flames. Randy's body had to be identified by dental records, as it had been burned beyond recognition. It was later revealed that Aycock had been doing cocaine all night prior to his fateful flight. Rolling Stone magazine lists Randy at number 36 on its list of greatest guitarists of all time. I would probably move him up a lot higher, but that's just me. He was a guitarist, mixing different styles and bringing classical music to heavy metal, as other guitarists like Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai would eventually follow Randy in doing. Randy Rhoads, tragically killed in a plane crash on March 19, 1982, was 25 years old at the time. Landrew the Love Child, man of golden words. Both are nicknames for this next person. If Neil Young is the godfather of grunge music, then this man was the prodigal son. He was the one who was supposed to be the next big thing coming out of Seattle. If only. Andrew Wood was born on January 8, 1966 in Columbus, Mississippi, until his family moved to Bainbridge Island near Seattle, Washington. From a very early age, Andrew was involved in music. When he was 14 years old, he formed the band Malfunction. Their style of music was tilted towards the glam rock style, and much like glam rock personas of before, the band had on stage alter egos. Andrew chose Landrew the Love Child. They developed a small following in the Seattle underground, performing for still unknown bands like Soundgarden, whose lead singer Chris Cornell was also for a time Woods' roommate, and also the band Green River. Andrew also unfortunately started having a serious drug problem by the time he was 19 and went into rehab for the first time in 1985. In 1986, supposedly clean, Malfunction recorded a couple of demos and shopped them around to local record labels, including the legendary record label Sub Pop, who actually turned them down. The group finally called it quits in 1988 without ever releasing an album. In 1988, another young grunge band also called it quits, the aforementioned group Green River. Green River had members Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, who hooked up with Andrew along with Malfunction's drummer Regan Hager. They sometimes performed under the name Lords of the Wasteland. The group also added Bruce Fairweather, who had been in Green River. In 1989, they decided to form a group called Mother Love Bone, after replacing Regan Hager with drummer Greg Gilmore, who was in the band 10 Minutes Warning and also the band Skin Yard. Finally, in 1989, Wood got his wish when Mother Love Bone was signed to a record deal. It wasn't with Sub Pop, though. It was with Polygram Records, who put them on their subsidiary label Stardog. The group recorded and released an EP called Shine. While they were touring to support the EP, they recorded what would be their full-length debut album, Apple. Andrew also checked himself into rehab again, hoping to finally get clean in time for the release of the Apple album. 1990 opened with the band waiting for the record label to release the album finally. And while they waited, they did some shows in Seattle to keep fresh. From all accounts, Andrew was ready to hit the big time. He was the absolute perfect showman. He had rock and roll swagger and onstage charisma that was unmatched by anybody in the grunge rock community. If there was ever the one guy who could have handled and wanted the fame that went along with being Seattle's breakout star, it was Andrew. Wasn't Kurt Cobain, not Lane Staley, not Chris Cornell, and not Eddie Vedder. He had even stopped doing drugs. Or at least people thought he did. On March 16th, 1990, Woods' girlfriend found him passed out from a heroin overdose. He was rushed to the hospital where, for a while, it looked like he was going to recover. The heroin, unfortunately, had cost him his brain functions. And on March 19th, 1990, Andrew Wood was taken off of life support and passed away. So, what happened to everybody after that? Well, Andrew's ex-roommate, Chris Cornell, you already know about. He continued with Soundgarden before joining with members of Rage Against the Machine as Audioslave and then getting back to Soundgarden until his untimely death by suicide in 2017. However, right after Woods' death, Chris wrote a couple of songs before he got together with Mother Love Bone members Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament to do a tribute album to Andrew together. They recruited drummer Matt Cameron, guitarist Mike McCready, and another singer who had just arrived into town named Eddie Vedder, and released their tribute album under the name Temple of the Dog. During this time, everybody in that group except for Cornell was also recording an album together. They named their group Mookie Blaylock, but later changed it to what we now know them as today, Pearl Jam. As for Mother Love Bone's music, Polygram Records put all of the tracks together from both Shine and Apple and released them as one album called Mother Love Bone. There are also songs and tributes to Wood on the hit soundtrack to Cameron Crowe's hit movie Singles. What would have been? Andrew Wood, lead singer of Malfunction and Mother Love Bone, passed away from a heroin overdose on March 19th, 1990. He was 24 years old. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. On March 21st, 1952, an event happened that today is so normal that people don't even give it a second thought. Back then, though, what happened changed music as we know it. First, though, a little background. Alan Freed was a DJ who got his start at WAKR Radio in Akron, Ohio, where he played standards and jazz records. He stayed with the station until 1951, when he moved to Cleveland, Ohio. But because Akron and Cleveland were close together, Allen had a non-compete clause in his contract that said that he couldn't compete in a close market in the daytime period for a few years. And that meant that he had no choice but to take on the overnight shift at his new radio station, WJW. Freed, however, made the most of the time period. See, a few years earlier, Freed met Leo Mintz. Mintz owned Record Rendezvous in Cleveland, which had started selling R&B records. Mintz figured that he would have a large black clientele for the records, but a funny thing kind of happened. It was actually white kids who were coming in and buying the records. When Mintz mentioned to Freed what was going on, it gave Freed an idea. Freed had been given the slot at the station with Mintz being its chief sponsor. He started playing the R&B records. He called his show the Moondog House and called his fan base Moondoggers. His theme song was a record called Moondog, and Moondog was actually the stage name of a New York street musician. Freed liked the name, and so he used it. Soon, Freed was extremely popular. He brought a hip style to his DJing, using the phrase rock and roll so much that he's credited with popularizing it, even though the phrase had actually been black slang for sex for years. To Freed's credit, he never played the whitewashed versions of R&B songs like Pat Boone redoing Little Richard's records. So what's a DJ to do when he gets ultra popular and he's on the cusp of national popularity? He puts on a dance. Actually, he billed it as a dance. It was really a concert. He called it the Moondog Coronation Ball. Catchy title. The concert was to be held at the Cleveland Arena on March 21st, 1952. Freed would host. The bands were all local acts. Paul Williams and the Hucklebuckers were the opening act. Other acts were Tiny Grimes, the Dominoes, Beretta Dillard, Danny Cobb, and the Rocking Highlanders, who were a black instrumental group who wore Scottish kilts because... Actually, I'm still kind of confused by that one. Who thought that one up? I mean, I realize it was 1952, and apparently black leather jackets and blue jeans weren't a thing at the time, but kilts? Really? Wow, drugs must have been hitting good that day. Then again, Samuel L. Jackson did manage to pull off the look in a movie not too long ago, so why not? What do I know? Anyway, back on topic. There were a couple of serious problems with this dance/concert, whatever you want to call it. The first problem was that there were a lot of counterfeit tickets going around. The second was that the arena only fit 10,000 people. On the night of the concert, by the way, over 20,000 people showed up. Slight issue. Paul Williams took the stage first, and right after his first song was finished, he got off the stage. Concert over. The fire department saw the crowd and feared a riot breaking out if 20,000 people crowded into a place that only held 10,000 people, so they shut it down. Okay, them and a lot of fire hoses apparently, and also more than a few policemen. These guys came prepped to shut this thing down. In any event, even though it was over right after it started, it is still credited as being the first rock and roll concert ever held. It also clocks in at probably the shortest rock and roll concert ever held at approximately 2 whole minutes. That's it. 2 minutes. On, off, concert done. As far as Freed went, he had to issue an apology the next day. His show also went national, being picked up by WINS in New York City, among many other radio stations. Freed became a driving force in bringing rock and roll to the masses, even showing up in a few movies until a payola scandal doomed his career in the early 1960s. Freed passed away from disease brought on by alcoholism on January 20th, 1965 at the age of 43. If you ever wanted to know why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is located in Cleveland instead of somewhere like, say, New York City, Miami, Memphis, Nashville, Chicago, New Orleans, LA, or any other major musical city, well, that's your reason. And now you know. The world's first and quite possibly shortest rock and roll concert, the Moondog Coronation Ball, held in Cleveland, Ohio, on March 21st, 1952. Next, the history of the major artist Las Vegas residency is almost as old as Las Vegas itself. I'm not talking about acts who had shows forever and a day there, like Siegfried and Roy, Charo, and of course the iconic Lola Falana. I am talking about Wayne Newton, Frank Sinatra and the rest of his Rat Pack cohorts, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. And of course, there is also the Elvis Presley Vegas Elvis era with the white jumpsuit, which is a meme all unto itself. The trend had died down during the rough times in Vegas during the switchover from mob-controlled resorts to corporate resorts. Things started to get better as owner Steve Wynn opened up some themed resorts. The Palms Resort helped to bring the celebrity party crowd back in the late 1990s. Still, though, high-quality popular music artists stayed away and left Vegas to, well, Wayne Newton, as the joke was that Vegas was where popular artists went to play when they weren't popular anymore, and they needed to make a little extra cash without touring. That all changed on March 25th, 2003, when Celine Dion started her first Las Vegas residency, called Celine Dion A New Day at Caesars Palace. Caesars renovated their Coliseum venue for her to put on her stage production. The contract was originally for 3 years at $100 million plus 50% of all profits. It was stretched out to 5 years and grossed over $385 million from 717 shows. In today's money, that works out to $543 million, U.S., of course. After she finished her last show on December 15, 2007, she took a few months off, then did a world tour for a few years. However, in 2011, Vegas came calling again. And so Celine did a second residency, which ran to 2017, with short breaks here and there for sanity's sake, obviously. After artists saw just how much money Celine made doing show after show, and all of it without the rigor of touring, others wanted in on their own residency deals. Elton John had one, Shania Twain had one, and the trend continues to this day with Katy Perry, Adele, and Usher all doing one. Even the Wu-Tang Clan did one, or at least is in the process of doing one even as we speak. DJs had been doing residencies, of course, in clubs for decades, long before Celine did. However, Celine's success also helped to usher in the era of the superstar club DJ residencies in Las Vegas a decade later, when DJs like Steve Aoki and Tiesto started making some serious multi-million-dollar residency deals. The residency era and idea also carried over to, of all places, New York City, where Billy Joel has done a once-a-month residency at the famed Madison Square Garden for well over a decade now, with 2024 being the last year that he is slated to perform before he does, of course, what every other New Yorker does and retires to live in the six-borough Florida. Can Taylor Swift be far behind with her own residency in Vegas or maybe even Nashville? Probably in about a decade or so. I'd be willing to put money on that one. Celine Dion opening her first Las Vegas residency, changing Las Vegas entertainment forever on March 25th, 2003. In our final segment, we're going to celebrate the lives of two legendary Rock and Roll Hall of Famers who share the same birth date, exactly 5 years apart. Ladies first. When you think of great singers whose work has stood the test of time, Aretha Franklin's has to be considered in at least the top 5. Rolling Stone magazine named her the greatest singer, male or female, of all time. The Queen of Soul had 77 songs hit the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart, 17 of which went top 10. She was the first female artist inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She won 18 Grammy Awards and sold over 75 million records worldwide. She was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, at least 12 honorary college degrees, along with more than a few doctorates, by the way, and was given both the Grammy Legend Award and the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. And she has sung everything from gospel to pop to R&B to even some classical music. Aretha was born on March 25, 1942 in Memphis, Tennessee, and started out as a youngster singing gospel in her father C.L. Franklin's church in Detroit, Michigan. Her father was a minister who became a bit of a celebrity in the Detroit area due to his energetic sermons. Because of this, as a child, Aretha knew people such as gospel legend Mahalia Jackson, who sometimes even babysat her, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who she sang for before some of his rallies. Her childhood, despite knowing a lot of celebrities, was not an easy one. Her mom and dad divorced when she was 6 due to her father's multiple affairs. Her mom died when Aretha was 10. By the time Aretha was 14, she had 2 children. Before she turned 18, Aretha decided to switch from singing gospel to R&B, following in her friend singer Sam Cooke's footsteps. She first recorded with Columbia Records. In those 6 years, she only found mid-level success at best. In 1967, she went to Atlantic Records, and it was there where Aretha made her mark. Her first album at Atlantic, which was released on March 10th, was I Never Loved a Man the Way That I Love You. That album had the hit song I Never Loved a Man the Way That I Love You, Do Right Man, Do Right Woman, Baby, 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 and her signature song, Respect. The irony of singing this song about empowerment was that at the same time, Aretha was in an abusive marriage with her manager, Ted White, whom she finally divorced a couple of years later. Aretha wanted to record with the famed Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. She got to the studio and recorded I Never Loved a Man, but her recording session only lasted 1 day as her husband/manager got into a fist fight with Muscle Shoals owner Rick Hall on the first day of recording. She left the next day. Still, the vocals for the song were finished on the first day, so they were put onto the song. Her signature song, Respect, was originally recorded by Otis Redding. Aretha and producer Jerry Wexler added the sax solo in the middle, and the Sock It To Me line was added by Aretha and her sister, Carolyn. The album itself went to number 1 on Billboard's R&B chart and number 2 on the pop chart. The single Respect was number 1 on the pop chart, while the single I Never Loved a Man peaked at number 9. When it first came out, it was given decent reviews, except that some reviewers thought the musicians on the album could have been better. Sad as that was. Time changes things, of course. The Muscle Shoals group is now themselves in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This particular album set the stage for Aretha's rise, with her next couple of albums cementing her legacy. Her next album, Aretha Arrives, arrived only 5 months after her Atlantic debut album and had the hit Baby I Love You. Columbia Records, her former label, then tried to capitalize on Aretha's newfound success by releasing a compilation album, Take a Look, only a month after Aretha Arrives. Unless you're a huge fan of Aretha's and needs every single thing she's ever put out, you could probably skip the Columbia release. The album Lady Soul was her third album released by Atlantic in less than a year. Aretha then started recording the album on February 16, 1967 at Atlantic Studios in New York City. Legendary producer Jerry Wexler was at the producing helm for this particular album. Aretha had some star power to help her out on this one. Among the guys on guitar were Eric Clapton and Bobby Womack. And singing backup vocals were Aretha's sister and gospel singer, and also the mother of Whitney Houston, Cissy Houston. The big singles off of this album were You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, which was written by Carole King, herself in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with Chain of Fools and Since You've Been Gone. The album was released on January 22, 1968 and went to number 2 on the Billboard Albums chart. Lady Soul is considered one of the greatest albums of all time on a lot of different best of lists. Her next albums, Aretha Now and Aretha in Paris, kept her on a roll with hits like Rocksteady and Daydreaming. Then she started hitting speed bumps with a bunch of her albums towards the end of the 1970s, and at the end of 1979, Aretha and Atlantic Records parted ways. In 1980, Aretha signed with legendary record label head Clive Davis with his record label Arista Records. Her first act with the new label was to film her part in the Blues Brothers movie. Her 1980 album Aretha did okay and yielded the hits United Together and her version of Otis Redding's song I Can't Turn You Loose. Her follow-up, Love All the Hurt Away, did well, becoming her first gold record in years. Her 1982 album, Jump to It, did even better, with the song Jump to It becoming a big hit. 1985's album, Who's Zoomin' Who, was her breakout album of the Arista era. Aretha by now had switched her sound to a more pop sound. It worked like a charm, with big hits Freeway of Love with the saxophone of Clarence Clemens of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. She also had the big hits Who's Zoomin' Who and her worldwide hit duet with George Michael, I Knew You Were Waiting for Me. Who's Zooming Who was the zenith of Aretha's post-Atlantic career, going platinum. In 1987, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as the first female to ever be inducted into that hall. After that, while she did albums that were mid-level in terms of sales, she settled into legend status, doing tours and special performances. There was, for instance, the 1988 Grammy Awards, where she filled in last second for Luciano Pavarotti, who was ill the night of the ceremony. The ceremony producers asked Aretha to step in and perform the aria Nessun Dorma, which she had performed with Pavarotti only a couple of nights before at a charity function. Aretha rehearsed with the orchestra for a little while, figuring that she could sing it in the key that the orchestra already knew it in, and then delivered a performance of the ages that night that is still talked about to this day, which it garnered an extremely long standing ovation from the Grammy audience. I mean, who knew that Aretha could sing opera? Search it out on Google and YouTube. It's an amazing performance. As the new century rolled on, Aretha continued touring, but her health concerns began to take their toll. She ended up canceling shows and shortening tours. Her final full concert was held on September 3, 2017, although she did give one more performance for Elton John's AIDS charity concert on November 7, 2017. Aretha announced performance dates for 2018, but the dates were postponed, never to be fulfilled. On August 16, 2018, coincidentally on the same date in history that the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, passed away in 1977, that is, the world lost the Queen of Soul at the age of 76. The Queen of Soul, Miss Aretha Franklin, born March 25th, 1942. Now to the guy who was born 5 years later. Reginald Kenneth Dwight, stage name Elton John, was born on March 25th, 1947 in Middlesex, England. He started out as a pianist in the local pubs before forming the band Bluesology. After answering an ad that was placed by an A&R guy from Liberty Records for a songwriter, he was asked to put music to a bunch of lyrics by a guy by the name of Bernie Taupin. And that began one of the longest songwriting partnerships in music history. Elton's first album was Empty Sky, which didn't do all that much. His self-titled follow-up album did much better, spawning the classics Border Song and Your Song. Madman Across the Water and Tumbleweed Connection furthered his rise. From 1969 to 1974, he had put out 6 studio albums, a soundtrack, and a live album, a stunning volume of work in only 5 years. Elton had also begun a streak of #1 albums, Honky Chateau in 1972 and Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player in the beginning of 1973. Apparently not one to rest on his laurels, he and Bernie decided that they should record their next album in Jamaica. The Rolling Stones had recorded their album, Goathead Soup, in Jamaica, and Elton loved that album. Plus, it's Jamaica. Warm, tropical sun, island breezes, great food, reggae music, friendly people. Hell, my mother's Jamaican. Literally, my mother is Jamaican. How bad could it possibly be? Yeah, well, turns out it was kind of bad. For starters, the country was going through some political tensions, we'll say, as an election the year before had swept Prime Minister Michael Manley to power over the very unpopular incumbent Prime Minister Hugh Shearer. But the economic conditions were such that violence broke out regularly. Add to that, George Foreman and Joe Frazier were having a big boxing match on the island at the same time as Bernie and Elton trying to record, which created a lot of congestion. And also, to go along with all of that, the studio equipment had issues. The only good thing to come out of the Jamaican experience was that Elton and Bernie managed to write all of the songs for the album very quickly. Bernie took almost 3 weeks to write the lyrics, and Elton took only 3 days to write the music. After this perfect storm of craziness, the guys decided to go back to Europe to record the album. They ended up at the Château de Hourville in France, which was where they recorded their last 2 albums. The album itself ended up being long, although it wasn't really planned that way. It was only supposed to be a single album, but since they recorded 18 songs, they decided to make it a double album. The album was originally called Silent Movies, Talking Pictures, and Vodka and Tonics before they finally settled on the actual name Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. It was released on October 5th, 1973, and despite the fact that 6 of the album's songs are considered classic rock staples, at the time the album was originally released, only 3 songs were released as singles in America: Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and Benny and the Jets. Candle in the Wind and Harmony were released in Great Britain. Funeral for a Friend and Love Lies Bleeding was not released due to its length of over 11 minutes at the time. The album became the best-selling one of his career, with over 8 million certified copies sold in America alone. It was in the top 10 in 9 different countries and number 1 in 4 of them. It was the biggest selling album of 1974 and is considered by many to be his magnum opus. From there, Elton went on a roll. To date, he has put out at least 32 studio albums, 4 live albums, 7 soundtrack albums, including his Academy Award-winning work on The Lion King, and has sold over 350 million albums worldwide and counting. Of course, if you've seen his biopic Rocket Man, then you know all about his private life, his drug problems and rehab, his near bankruptcy, etc., etc. But hey, rock and roll. He's still considered to be one of the greatest artists of all time. In fact, even though he has officially retired from touring after over 50 years, he's more popular than ever, as his last album, 2021's The Lockdown Sessions, went top 10, and his duet, Cold Heart with Dua Lipa, went to number 1, opening up his work to yet another generation of fans. For the record, I don't actually think he's done touring. My prediction? He's going to announce his I'm Not Dead Yet tour by, let's call it, 2026. Elton's Princess Diana version of Candle in the Wind is the biggest selling single of all time worldwide. He's had way too many hit singles to name here from virtually every single decade, from Your Song all the way up to Cold Heart and beyond. I don't think he's actually done yet. He's had 19 top 10 songs in the 1970s, 7 top 10 songs in the 1980s, 4 top 10 songs in the 1990s. He didn't have any in the 2000s, although he had a few in England during that decade. He had 1 top 10 song in the 2010s and 2 so far at least in the 2020s. He's won a Tony for the Broadway musical Aida, an Academy Award for The Lion King, 6 Grammy Awards, and he has finally completed the EGOT by winning an Emmy Award in 2023. He has been knighted by the late Queen Elizabeth II and has been given similar national awards from the countries of France and the United States. Plus, there's his very important work with the Elton John AIDS Foundation, to which Aretha's last actual performance was at one of Elton John's AIDS Foundation functions. The man is more than a legend. He's an institution. The Rocket Man, Sir Elton John, born on March 25th, 1947. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for March 19th through the 25th. Thanks for listening.